The air in the sterile, auditorium-sized lab felt charged, thick with the anticipation of a paradigm shift. On the central platform sat the Bioprinter 5000, a gleaming monument to 4 years of my life. Inside its containment unit, a complex cardiac scaffold, printed layer by layer, pulsed gently. I was Dr. Sarah Vance, and the solution being pumped into that scaffold was my life's work, the Regenerative Bio-Ink, RBI. It was a synthesized matrix of growth factors and cellular scaffolding capable of stabilizing a 3D printed organ and coaxing it into full functionality within a living system. It was the invention that would solve the global organ donor crisis. Today was the final, live clinical presentation to the FDA, investors, and the world press. If this demonstration, the integration of a bioprinted heart into a simulated circulatory system, was successful, Genesis BioTech, the company I co-founded with my fiancé, Markus Thorne, would secure final Phase 3 approval. Markus stood beside me, radiating practiced confidence. He was the CEO, the face, the smooth talker. One more successful integration, darling, and we changed the world, he whispered, squeezing my hand with a familiarity that now felt chillingly possessive. Dr. Lena Cruz, our Chief Operations Officer, a woman whose efficiency I had always admired, stood nearby, monitoring the system diagnostics. All systems nominal, Sarah. Just push the compound. I reached for the syringe containing the RBI. It was a proprietary, clear liquid, viscous and silent. I depressed the plunger. The liquid flowed into the scaffold. For a few perfect seconds, the printed organ absorbed the material beautifully. Then, the reaction began. It wasn't stabilization. It was annihilation. The translucent bioprinted tissue didn't integrate. It curdled, turning milky white, then black, before rapidly disintegrating into a toxic slurry. The pressure alarmed shrieked. The entire cardiac system collapsed instantly on the screen behind me. Silence. Then, an instantaneous, horrified roar from the audience. I stood paralyzed, staring at the ruined, sludgy mass, the physical manifestation of my entire professional life dissolving. Markus was the first to react, but his response wasn't shock. It was theatrical horror. The compound. Sarah, what did you inject? That was the contaminated batch. Lena rushed forward, seizing the empty syringe from my numb hand. It's corrosive, Markus. It's the contaminated batch we flagged last month. Sarah, why would you use this? The narrative was complete before I could even draw a breath. The brilliant but overworked scientist, Dr. Sarah Vance, had tragically confused the highly sensitive RBI with a failed, toxic preliminary compound, destroying the organ and jeopardizing the entire future of Genesis BioTech. The next few hours were a dizzying nightmare. FDA officials secured the lab. The press descended like vultures. Markus played the role of the distraught co-founder, protecting the company's reputation while sacrificing mine. Dr. Vance's exhaustion led to a catastrophic misjudgment. He stated publicly, his voice heavy with false regret. We are heartbroken, but we must cooperate fully with the FDA investigation. Lena backed him up with meticulous, damning data, showing the contaminated batch had been logged and segregated, and only I had access to that specific server log. In the ensuing chaos, I was escorted out, collapsing under the sheer weight of the failure and the betrayal. In the ambulance, staring at the ceiling, the chilling clarity finally arrived. The contaminated batch narrative was a lie. Lena had swapped the syringes at the last second, precisely when the lights had flickered during the setup rehearsal yesterday. The failed compound wasn't just contaminated, it was a rapidly destructive poison, designed to cause a visible, irrefutable failure. They didn't want to delay the patent sale to Agrippa Pharma. They wanted to accelerate it, clean of my ethical constraints. Agrippa only dealt in profitable, proprietary drugs, not public, regenerative solutions. They needed me discredited, or better yet, dead, to finalize the acquisition. The shock, the betrayal, and the profound injustice. It felt like cellular failure. I suffered a massive heart attack right there in the ambulance, my own body giving up under the terminal weight of their greed. I watched myself die. I saw Lena and Markus toasting their victory, discussing the massive offshore transfers, and mocking my naivete. Then, the universe performed its own regenerative miracle. A violent, white, humming pressure that reset my timeline. I gasped, shooting upright in my bed at home. The clock on my nightstand glowed. 7 a.m. The presentation was scheduled for 3 p.m. in 3 days. I was back. And this time, I wouldn't just regenerate my body, I would regenerate my entire future. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From kinetic energy. I had exactly 72 hours to secure my intellectual property and set an irreversible trap. First, the master formula. It was the core of the Regenerative Bio-Ink, stored in a cryo chamber in my home lab, alongside its complete, uncompromised digital schematic. I rushed to the lab and accessed the cryo chamber. The RBI was a living compound. The formula was the blueprint. I transferred the total master formula, physical and digital, onto a series of small, encrypted microdrives, sealing them in a portable, shielded case. This was the true IP. What Genesis BioTech had was a secondary commercial-grade replica, now contaminated. At 8:30 a.m., I arrived at the Genesis BioTech labs, composed and sharp. I found Lena in the control room, reviewing the final security protocols. She looked up, her smile practiced but brittle. "Sarah, you look well. I was worried you were overworking again." "Just a sudden clarity, Lena," I said, meeting her eyes. "I realized something critical about the RBI's integrity check. We need to run a final, off-site, full-spectrum diagnostic on the commercial compound before the presentation. I won't risk this trial." "Off-site? Why?" she asked, her guard immediately up. "Because the lab's filtration system is old, Lena. Any microscopic environmental contaminant could compromise the RBI. I need to test it in a clean room with independent regulatory standards. The FDA's own testing facility, perhaps." I knew this would panic her. She couldn't let the compound out of her sight, or let the FDA near it early. "That's unnecessary, Sarah. I've run 5 integrity checks myself. Then you'll run a 6th under my supervision, using a sample I collect." I cut in, using my seniority to steamroll her. "It's a non-negotiable term in the Phase 3 ethics mandate. If you refuse, I halt the presentation." She had to comply. Delaying the presentation would ruin Markus's timeline for the Agrippa patent sale. I took a large, pristine syringe and extracted a sample of the commercial RBI. But I didn't stop there. Using the knowledge of my prior life, I went to the storage cabinet where Lena kept the actual contaminated batch, the one they planned to inject on Wednesday. I extracted an identical, large sample of the poison. "I'm taking both the prime and the control for parallel, off-site testing," I announced, sealing the samples in 2 separate, tamper-proof files. "I'll be gone for the next 2 days. I expect absolute quiet when I return." I left the lab and immediately called Markus. "Markus, I need to postpone the presentation," I said, sounding distraught. "I found a discrepancy in the RBI viscosity. It's too high. If we proceed, it will fail." Markus erupted. "Postpone? Sarah, you can't. Agrippa is sending their chief legal counsel. We lose the window." "Then you need to trust my science, Markus," I insisted. "I'll tell the FDA I need 48 hours to recalibrate the printer matrix. Blame the equipment, not the formula. I'll make up the time." He agreed, reluctantly. He was too blinded by the impending billions to risk the entire operation, and too arrogant to believe I could truly deceive him. He believed he still controlled the environment. I secured the 2 samples, the commercial RBI and the contaminated batch, and disappeared. My new base of operations was a rented, secure, nondescript lab in an industrial park. I initiated the contagion protocol. The betrayal wasn't just in the formula swap, it was systemic. Lena and Markus had been running illegal, off-the-books clinical trials using a cheap, unstable version of the RBI to cut costs and accelerate data for Agrippa, a clear case of felony medical fraud. The failure on Wednesday was simply the public execution of my credibility. I needed to expose the entire fraudulent pipeline, not just the swap. I focused on the contaminated batch, the lethal substance. I used a high-powered mass spectrometer to analyze the poison. It wasn't just a failed batch. It was a compound deliberately laced with X57, a banned synthetic compound that caused rapid cellular necrosis and, crucially, left a distinct, traceable signature in the waste stream. I placed a strategic, anonymous call to the Office of Regulatory Affairs, ORA, a branch of the FDA known for its aggressive pursuit of research misconduct. I am reporting an acute environmental contaminant at Genesis BioTech, I stated calmly into the burner phone. The waste stream contains significant, persistent traces of compound X57. This suggests the illegal use of a banned compound in a bioprocessing unit. Check their incineration logs for the past 6 months, specifically anything related to Project Phoenix. Project Phoenix was the codename for Markus's illegal trials. It was the only codename I knew they wouldn't have purged yet. This call triggered the internal alarm at the ORA. They wouldn't raid the facility yet, but they would immediately assign a lead investigator to begin a deep dive audit of Genesis BioTech's regulatory filings, waste logs, and material safety data sheets. That lead investigator, I knew from my previous life's postmortem, would be Dr. Julian Hayes. Julian Hayes, a meticulous, quiet, fiercely ethical regulatory scientist. In my past life, he was the man who had reluctantly signed the warrant for my arrest, but also the one who spent months trying to find a technicality to clear my name, ultimately failing due to Lena's perfect data trail. He was the key to my redemption. I had to lead Julian to the truth before Markus could cover his tracks. At day 2, 10 a.m., I had my chance. I showed up at Julian's small, unglamorous ORA office. Julian looked up, surprised. He recognized me immediately. "Dr. Vance?" I received the notification. "Your Phase 3 trial is under review. Your company is being audited." "I know, Dr. Hayes," I said, placing the sealed vial containing the contaminated batch on his desk. "Because I called in the contaminant report myself. And I brought you the evidence." He looked at the vial, then back at me, his face a study in suspicion and intellectual curiosity. He wasn't slick or handsome like Markus. He was thoughtful, solid, and had the kind of intense focus that comes from a deep commitment to facts. "This is the RBI compound scheduled for injection on Wednesday," I stated. "And it's laced with X57. They plan to use this to destroy the printed organ and blame me for the catastrophic failure, discrediting my name just before they sell the clean patent to Agrippa Pharma." "That is an extraordinary accusation, Dr. Vance. Why would you expose yourself to potential criminal charges by admitting you had access to a contaminant?" "Because I'm not guilty, Dr. Hayes. I'm the target. Markus and Lena are using the company's clean data stream as a cover for massive, illegal trials, Project Phoenix, funded by Agrippa to test dangerous, proprietary drug stabilizers. The X57 traces in the waste stream are the residue of those illegal trials, not a simple, contaminated batch. They replaced my clean RBI with this poison to frame me." I presented him with the master formula microdrive. "Here is the true, uncompromised, copyrighted formula for the RBI. It contains no X57, and it is the only proof of my innocence." Julian didn't look at the evidence with skepticism. He looked at it with the rigor of a scientist seeking empirical truth. He ran the X57 analysis on the contaminated batch immediately. Within hours, the results were conclusive. "The presence of X57 is irrefutable," Julian stated, his eyes wide with shock. "This is not merely contamination. This is deliberate sabotage. If this was injected, it would cause rapid, catastrophic failure in any biosystem. And if you follow the X57 paper trail, the purchase logs, the disposal manifests, you'll find Project Phoenix, Markus's offshore accounts, and the final patent transfer documents to Agrippa Pharma," I urged. "They plan to destroy me and my breakthrough to profit from a poison." Julian was the professional I always knew him to be. He didn't ask for personal details. He simply initiated the ORA's full-spectrum investigation, freezing Genesis BioTech's assets and seizing all their digital records. The confrontation occurred precisely at 3 p.m. on the day of the scheduled trial. Markus, dressed in a custom suit, was addressing the waiting investors and press, explaining the unforeseen equipment delay with practiced charm. Lena was nowhere to be seen, likely destroying the last pieces of evidence. The moment Julian Hayes and a team of ORA and FBI agents walked onto the stage, the room fell silent. Markus's smile froze on his face. "Dr. Hayes? What is the meaning of this intrusion?" "Markus Thorne, Dr. Lena Cruz, you are under federal investigation for medical fraud, conspiracy to commit insider trading, and reckless endangerment of public health," Julian announced, his voice carrying the authority of the law. "Your assets are frozen and your intellectual property is seized." Markus erupted, his composure finally shattering. "This is insane. Sarah, you did this. She's having a psychotic episode. She's the one who used the contaminated batch." I stepped out from behind the regulatory team, perfectly composed in a sharp, professional Navy suit. "The contaminated batch you plan to use to frame me, Markus," I stated. "I simply traded it for the evidence. Your biggest mistake wasn't stealing my formula, it was underestimating my commitment to the scientific method." I pointed to the Bioprinter 5000. "The real RBI formula stabilizes organs. The compound you held was laced with X57, a compound designed for chemical degradation, not cellular growth. Dr. Hayes has traced its use back to Project Phoenix, your illegal, offshore trials designed to satisfy Agrippa Pharma's hunger for proprietary poisons." Lena, trying to slip out a side door, was intercepted by an agent. Markus, cornered, his face a mask of primal fury, lunged toward me. "You were dead. You were supposed to be disgraced. I funded you. I gave you everything. You funded the shell, Markus." "I funded the science," I retorted, standing firm. "And you gave me a terminal diagnosis, a mistake I had the chance to reverse. You thought I valued your ring more than my life's work. You were wrong." Julian placed a calming hand on my arm, a silent shield. The gesture was immediate and proprietary, yet deeply respectful of my strength. "The company is dissolved," Julian informed Markus, showing him the official decree. "The clean master formula for the Regenerative Bio-Ink has been secured by the government and will be transitioned to a new, non-profit entity dedicated to public health use." Markus Thorne, the polished entrepreneur, was led away, his empire reduced to a stack of damning financial and scientific ledgers. His greed had been so transparent, so predictable, that it served as the very evidence of his crime. 5 years later, the building was sleek, modern, and bathed in natural light, overlooking a public park. The name on the brass plaque read, "Vance Hayes Regenerative Initiative." We were a non-profit foundation dedicated to ethical bioengineering, funded by the seized assets of Genesis BioTech and public grants. Our mission was simple: make the RBI publicly available, not proprietary. I was the CEO and Chief Scientific Officer. My name was synonymous with ethical breakthrough. The anxiety and bitterness of the past were gone, replaced by the profound satisfaction of honest, life-altering work. Julian and I shared not just a lab, but a life. Our partnership began with a shared commitment to empirical truth and evolved into a quiet, enduring love built on the same integrity. He had left the ORA to join me, recognizing that true change happened not just in regulation, but in innovation guided by conscience. We were in the lab, reviewing the results of the latest iteration of the RBI, preparing for a distribution launch in 3 continents. "The latest data is flawless, Sarah," Julian said, his eyes scanning the molecular stability charts. "Zero degradation, 100% cellular viability. It's stable, clean, and ready." "It's perfect because the intention is perfect," I responded, leaning back against the bench. He looked at me, his gaze warm and direct. "You know, the FBI analysts were astounded by your preparation. They said your contagion protocol was a work of genius, a system designed to fail in a way that required regulatory attention, leading investigators precisely where you wanted them." "I learned 2 things from Markus, Julian," I admitted, turning to him. "First, never compromise the science. Second, never trust a man whose words don't align with his data. Julian took my hand, his touch steady. I'm glad my data was clean from the start. Your data, I murmured, leaning in, is the only metric that matters now. Our love story was not one of passionate deceit, but of quiet, mutual respect, built on the solid bedrock of shared values. We were two scientists who saved the world, not just with a formula but with a commitment to integrity. The downfall of Markus Thorne and Lena Cruz was as absolute as their arrogance. They both received significant prison sentences for conspiracy, wire fraud, and medical negligence. The regulatory blow was fatal. They were permanently barred from all positions in the medical, financial, and biotechnology sectors. Markus, stripped of his fortune and his charismatic stage, found life in prison intolerable. His self-worth was entirely dependent on external validation and wealth, both of which were gone forever. The loss of his image was a fate worse than incarceration. Lena, the cold professional, attempted to leverage her technical skills post-release, but found every door closed. Her public association with X57 and the Agrippa scandal meant no reputable research institution would touch her. She was relegated to low-level, toxic cleanup work, ironically dealing with the very compounds she once manipulated. Their greatest failure was the fate of the contaminated batch. When the FBI seized the lab, the unstable formula degraded completely, making it impossible for Agrippa Pharma to reverse engineer. They had stolen the wrong product, and in doing so, destroyed their own future market. The only thing that thrived was the true Regenerative Bio-Ink, now saving lives across the globe. I received a brief news clipping one morning. Markus Thorne had been denied parole after his third attempt. He was now just a number, a statistic in the federal penal system, a predictable, low-value data point in the system he once sought to exploit. I closed the file, feeling nothing but a cool sense of finality. I walked out to the lab, where Julian was waiting. We were about to launch a new trial distributing the RBI to a conflict zone in Africa, changing thousands of lives. I looked at my hand, not at the wedding ring, but at the steady hand of the scientist who held my future. I had come back from my terminal diagnosis to create not just a life, but a legacy. The science was honest, the relationship was true, and the genesis of my new life was complete.